Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Sylvan.
Marc Stöckli is an entrepreneur, investor, board member, and the author of Make Boards Work. In this conversation, he breaks down the real value of a board, not as a formal governance layer, but as a source of support, challenge, and strategic leverage for founders. He shares how startups can build boards that actually help the business move forward, from choosing who should have a seat to why short board tenures can make sense, how trust, psychological safety, and well-run meetings turn a board from a nuisance into a real advantage. If you're a founder building with investors or thinking about how to structure your company for the next stage, this episode is full of practical lessons on how to set up and leverage a board successfully. Marc, a very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you as a guest today.
My pleasure. Look forward to it.
Same here. You are an entrepreneur, investor, and board member, as well as the author of the Make Boards Work book, exactly the topic that we want to talk about and focus on today. Before we get started, your career spans across consulting, founding, investing, and obviously board leadership. When you look back, which early moments really shaped the way that you think about governance today?
Well, when you mention governance, and obviously board work is often equated with governance, I think there's one step behind of that is leadership, right? It comes down to leadership as well. It's a different type of leadership, maybe we can get there. Mm-hmm. So I think my first real experiences with leadership and leadership models was in the Army, in the Swiss Army. I served in the Swiss Army. I had a fantastic instructor in officer school. And one particular thing I emulated and learned from him is what I would call leading from the front. Really do as you say, walk the talk, really lead from the front. When you ask to run ahead and follow me and not go there. And that is a very, very important maxim. The second one, I think some of my strongest friendships in life come from the Army. Some people I've served with for a very long time together. You build trust. So hard times make for strong bonds. Right. And I think that, again, works in the board context as well. A board that has gone through a crisis, say, I think can gel and bond together and come out of it much stronger than before.
Absolutely. I love both of these examples. I think it's spot on, and really walking the talk is so crucial to also have the authenticity within your team. When did it then become clear to you after these experiences in the Army, but also your careers as founder, investor, that you really want to focus on this board topic, that this is a major part of your career?
Yes. Well, at the more superficial level, it started when I was a strategy consultant. I was with BCG, and at times, I was in board meetings at large corporates as a fairly young consultant. But that's quite superficial. I was just a service provider, right? I was a professional service provider. I was not a principal in the boardroom. But the real moment of truth came on a very famous, or probably rather infamous day known as 9/11. So pretty much exactly 25 years ago, I sat in a boardroom in the Goldbach Center in Küsnacht, and it was make or break for my company at the time. Basically, we had 4 founders, and we split 2 and 2. So it was really a deadlock, and we actually managed, and the board played a crucial role to go against the majority of the other 2 founders who actually held an equity majority, go against their wish and decide on an orderly liquidation and not go into bankruptcy. We made the investor we almost paid full back the investment. And before that board, I perceived it largely as useless. Mm-hmm. We had big names on it. We had very, very strong Swiss icons of business, large industrial families, very, very, very reputable people. And they didn't really step up. But when it mattered, at that day, actually they did. And they really made a huge change. So that really fascinated me. That kind of simmered in my head for a long time, and really created this fascination for what does it take? When is a board useless? Mm-hmm. And what does it take for a board to be truly valuable?
This is so fascinating because many times people think from the outside, a board is just there for governance, for some oversight. But many think exactly as you did, it's useless. What do they actually do? Yeah. So with your experience, what is the real purpose of a board that goes beyond just the pure legal framework?
I sometimes summarize it and it's a summary, right? It's simplified as support and challenge. But I think it's quite an apt description. So yes, there's the formal parts of certain decisions that are the prerogative of the board by the regulatory framework and all. But I think support and challenge captures the essence really well. Support, you know that as well, right? And we know that in EO, we talk often about that. Entrepreneurship is a very lonely path, right?
For sure.
Oftentimes, as an entrepreneur, I'm by myself. I might struggle in the company. I might have liquidity issues, or employees, or whatever it is, clients that step off. Who can I talk to, right? Very few people. So the board should be an opportunity for an entrepreneur, be it the founder, be it the family business member, to actually have a sounding chamber, an echo, a sparring partner, a mentor, to open up, to talk through certain issues and really be frank with issues and come to the board and get new inputs, new perspectives. And challenge, of course, same thing, right? I think one huge advantage the board has, possibly if played well, is that you have more distance from the day-to-day. As a CEO and her team, his team running the business, you're in the business 24/7, right? You're operational, you know everything, you know every nits and granny of the whole company, you know the employees. The larger it gets, maybe you don't know all employees anymore, but you know the large customers, you know the large suppliers, you know the large partners. You're in it. As a board member, you're not as close to the business. And that can be a huge advantage in terms of challenging to really say, not seeing the forest for the trees.
Exactly.
That's a perspective that more often than not the board can bring in, where it can be a new perspective, a new idea, maybe a risk that has been underestimated, maybe an opportunity that has been overlooked, that the board can contribute to discovering and unearthing and discussing.
I love that. Fully agree. And we have many founders listening to this podcast, and often they have a misconception about the board. Before we dive into how you make boards work, what is the single biggest misconception that you see founders having about boards and how to work with them?
Well, I really think the biggest of all, and that's really my motivation for publishing this book, Make Boards Work, is to get people to give it a chance to see that the board can add value, right? I think the biggest misconception is that's a waste of time, right? And unfortunately, and really sadly, often it is, right? Because it's malpracticed, because it's not done well. And then it's true. Then it's an exercise that just costs money, costs time, doesn't add value. And there's many entrepreneurs I met not so long ago. I had meetings in Johannesburg in South Africa, and I sat for lunch with a group of entrepreneurs. And I've told them, I don't have a board. I said, well, why don't you have a board? Well, all I hear, it's like a nuisance. It's like annoying, right? It's a waste of time. Yeah. So I think that is the biggest misconception. And I hope to be able to change that conception and motivate people, because, if you reach a certain size in your company, if you have external investors, most likely you will have to have a board.
Of course. There's just too much at stake. Now, if you
have to have a board, now why not try to do it well, right? Why be satisfied with an exercise on paper, right? With a mere necessity, we have to do it every quarter, and we have to hand in the memo of the minutes and all these things, the formalities, right? Why not step up and make sure that it truly provides value?
Yeah, if you have to do it, you might as well do it right.
Exactly.
You mentioned the stage. So I wonder, at what stage should I, as a startup founder, start to really think about assembling and putting together my board? Because if I'm just 3 founders getting started, it might not be the top priority then, right?
I would probably a bit provocatively still say right from the start.
Okay.
And maybe a little bit less controversial, definitely at least 1 year before you have to.
Okay.
So have to will be when you do a seed round, right? As soon as you have external money in it as a founder. As a family business, it's a different story, right? But even there, I think a board, and separate from the family governance, really have a board governance for the company, is of huge value as well. Yeah. Why do I say that? And I just recently wrote about that. I think you can start with something I call micro-governance, right? It doesn't have to be a formal board, but a monthly check-in. If you have your 3 founders, 3 co-founder scenario, a monthly check-in with one trusted advisor can add tremendous value. So you get kind of a large part of the board value of the support and challenge. you get with extremely low formalistic overhead, right? Just a monthly check-in, half an hour, standard agenda, go through the main things, financials, some client, top line thing, the talent side, whatever the core topics is, cover them, go through, have a frank discussion. And the preparation for that monthly check-in, that in itself is gold.
Exactly.
Right? Because it allows you to step back from the daily hustle and think, okay, if I have now half an hour with a guy who has 30 years more experience, kind of what are the 3 biggest things that are actually happening? That alone, that reflection alone is absolutely worth it.
Yeah, and you get in the right mode of working.
Totally get into this rhythm. Absolutely. Yes.
And when founders actually form their first board, even if it's a sort of an informal one to get started with, what are the most frequent mistakes that you see? Do they choose the wrong people? Do they not follow through? What are sort of the biggest mistakes there?
I think one clearly is, and there's no harm in aiming high, but there's a risk in aiming for big names. The big name itself does not help, right? People need to dedicate time, right? There's nobody who is smart enough, who is intelligent enough, that is able to add value without sufficient context. And sufficient context comes only with engagement. A quarterly meeting will not be sufficient, right? A startup, a scale-up moves so fast. The environment is so dynamic. Things change so fast. The company is a different one. Kind of half a year from now, it's basically a different company, right? So there's no way. So if I don't invest enough time, if I'm not responsive enough, there's no value. So I think that's one misconception, is that the brand name is exaggerated. And then people are not present and it doesn't work, and it leads to disappointment.
It's more status and signaling in that sense than actual getting value.
Yes. And in that sense, I would say present beats potential, right? If somebody's potentially very powerful, but is not present, it remains at that level, potential, right? You really need to be present. And besides, it's not just the time, it's also responsiveness, right? We all know that, especially in a fast-paced environment, in a tech world, things move fast, right? Some topics need to be discussed now. It doesn't help me, I have time in 2 weeks, right? Well,
too
not
late.
Really good, right?
Yeah.
The second one, I'd say, is exalted expectations, right? These people are board members. Yes, if they take it seriously, if they're the right people, they will engage, right? They will engage and really put in sweat and passion and be there. But at the same time, they will not do the fundraising for you. They will not open the 3 key client relationships. They will not open the 3 distribution partnerships. They can support these things. But it's in the C level, it's on the team to run the business operationally. So I think that's a second. It's not a magic wand, and we just make things happen. That doesn't work either.
Many founders hope for that, this magic bullet, and it's not their job.
And the last one, and here maybe I don't make new friends in my friendly VC and PE cycles. I think there's a bit of a misconception that the board representatives from your investors are just God-given and you have no say, right? Yes, of course, in the model we currently have, if you have a lead investor in your A round, most likely they will insist on a board seat, right? And that is hard to overcome, right? At the very least, though, you can say, well, who is on your board, right? It's not necessarily partner A, it can also be a different person, right? So I think there, don't forget, it's a discussion. It's not a one-side road, this is it, where you can also have an influence and discuss with the investor that it maybe is not just this natural evolution of adding one investor with every round and all you have is investors on the board, but also make sure that very early on, you have at least one independent person on the board, ideally over time as board chairman.
And I think that example you just shared, this is especially relevant for first-time founders because they lack the experience and they feel, the investors, they ask for that. They propose the person, I have no say in this. And they just accept whatever is being proposed to them.
Absolutely, yes. And I think there it helps to be reminded that it's a two-way street, right? It's a two-way discussion. You also have rights, you also have bargaining power, and take that and say, well, I really want to have a board that works, right? That is functional. Yes.
And when we think about the structure, like the size of the board and sort of the types of people that you should invite to the board, who comes to mind? I guess that also differs a bit from stage to stage. So who are the right people in my board?
Yes, I think it absolutely, as a small company, you shouldn't have 3 employees and 7 board members, right? It's a bit of a awkward pyramid and awkward optics and probably not the most efficient. So I think kind of a 3, 4, 5 kind of progression from seed round, A round, B round, around 5 people on the board is probably a kind of a good, again, it's not set in stone,
of course,
but as a good range to think about. And as I said, what I've learned, I did quite a few interviews for my book, also with VCs, with private equity executives. And what I noticed is that especially the really superstar VCs absolutely support the notion of having an independent chairperson on the board very early. They're not afraid of losing control or kind of giving away control. They really see it as a means to have a healthy and high hygiene performant board culture.
Yeah. It makes sense because then their investment is going to do better, obviously.
Absolutely. That was really fascinating to see. The VCs I would consider maybe a little bit less experienced and less status. They were more apprehensive about it, but the high flyers, the superstars, they were absolutely welcoming that. And I see this. I'm in discussion with a B round company here in Switzerland that has strong investors, and they're actually pushing and absolutely advocating that they onboard an independent board chairman.
Amazing.
Yes.
And what's the background of the people? Of course, one hand you have the investors, but who are the people that you should get on the board? Do you look for industry experts? Do you look for other entrepreneurs who successfully built and exited a company? Yeah. Who's the best board member?
I think that's really almost a religious debate. Do you look for specialists or more for generalists? I don't think there's a right answer. There's different fields where sometimes maybe specialist expertise is more relevant also on the board. In tendency, I'm more clearly leaning towards the generalist view. I think if you need specialist know-how, you probably need that in the front line. You probably need that operationally, and it's not sufficient to have it at the board level. No. I think an amazing example that I witnessed from very, very close as a board advisor and advisor to the 2 co-founders, although the company now is Northvolt, the Swedish battery company that's one of the fastest scaling companies ever in European history, best funded at the time with about 12 billion in funding. What they did very smart, and of course the outcome, is not as expected, but what they did very smartly is building their boards. They put the whole process of building a company into 3 stages, and said stage 1 is highly capital intensive. What we need, producing batteries needs huge amounts of capital because we need to build manufacturing plants, right? So their first board was very angled towards fundraising. So they had people, senior Rolodex guys from Goldman Sachs that have access to every sovereign wealth fund and every large family office in the world, and they managed to raise these 12 billion, right? The second phase, where they changed their boards deliberately, is now it's about industrial scale. So they were really looking for deep expertise in scaling industry, people who really built fantastic, huge plants for the likes of ABB or Scania or the like. At the third phase then was their IPO preparation, right? To really have IPO expertise on the board. And what I think also we can learn from them, and I think is something I believe firmly in, with that plan and with knowing that stages happen fast in scale-ups, startup scale-ups world, is to have relatively short board tenures. Traditionally, you hire board members for a very long time, right? It's almost frowned upon if a board member exits after 2 years, say, right? I think we need to break that dogma, right? I think it can be absolutely right and the healthy thing to do, to hire somebody for very specifically for 2 years, say, that's your place, we need exactly your profile on the board for these 2 years, and then there's an expiry date. It also makes the rolling off so much easier. Of course. Than if there's like this expectation of like it's almost lifelong, and after 2 years I ask somebody to possibly step out. It's very awkward, very uncomfortable, right? So I think short terms, especially in fast-moving, fast-growth environments, is very smart. One more thing, you asked about the entrepreneur. I think that's a very important thing, is that you start with the notion of building trust fast, right? You need to have established trust between CEO, C team, and the board. And maybe we get back to it. It's very, very fundamental. One thing I observe, and again also was validated in my interviews, is we both know the highs as an entrepreneur are super high, and the lows are very low, right?
The roller coaster.
It's a total roller coaster, and it takes an emotional toll, right? It takes an emotional toll. And people who really have been there themselves, people who are also entrepreneurs, who have been entrepreneurs, they not only rationally get it, but they have been there.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference. Again, they're super smart people. They have their credentials from universities and top professional services firms, etc. But if you ever have taken a salary and never really had your A on the line, right? That's a different story.
Of course.
To have gone through the sleepless nights, I think that is a very, again, possibly for the independent role, to have somebody who truly gets this roller coaster and has been there, who has been a risk taker themselves. I think that can be a very important aspect to consider for your board construction.
Yeah, you really need them in there.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So there are so many additional topics I want to talk about. I love the energy, and I already learned so much in just these few minutes.
Fantastic.
Before we dive into how you actually work with the board, etc., what is sort of the recommended duration that you mentioned? So 2 years, should it be even shorter, 1 year?
I think in exceptional circumstances, if you're really early in startup or in a very fast moving scale up environment where lots of things, the market, the product, the competitive landscape, the distribution, with many moving parts and they move fast. I think a 1 year period can even, yes, of course, there's also some notions of, kind of group dynamics where somebody joining a team, there's some integration hurdles and there's some friction, admitted. So, but I think it can be 1 year, 2 or 3 years. Absolutely. I think it's really smart to have relatively short terms. Of course, you can decide to renew them.
Exactly.
Right? But you have this break point, you have this reassessment. Yeah. Is it still the right thing? And it can be both sides, right?
Of course.
Because, to do this, what people sometimes forget is in the Swiss regulatory environment, and many other jurisdictions the same, there's a pretty high legal responsibility on your shoulders as a board member.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You're by our commercial code, Obligationenrecht, you're at the highest level of the governance, right? And the ultimate responsibility lies with the board.
Yep.
So I think that is sometimes a bit underestimated. So I think that's also a thought to consider when taking on the responsibility. And maybe 2 years later, I say, well, I've done my share and I'm actually happy to roll off. Maybe somebody else is better suited now.
Yeah. And I also like it because it's also expectation management to a certain degree. It's easier to say you do it for 1 year and then you renew it for another year.
Exactly.
Instead of saying we do it for 2 years, but after 1 year, I need to sort of get rid of you. It has a bitter taste.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
And who's driving that process? Like, who then is in charge of actually replacing the board members with the ones that are better suited for the next milestone to achieve? Is it the founders? Is it the majority shareholders? Who drives that process?
I think it should be the person driving the business. So it's the founder CEO, or it's the CEO possibly, if the founder, maybe already is kind of in manager mode and not in founder mode, Paul Graham.
Yeah.
Obviously, investors will have some rights along the way. It depends on your investment agreement, shareholder agreement. Possibly they might have a veto right, or it's kind of defined kind of to how fast the staging from adding a board member progresses is already prescribed in your documents. So they will have a say, but I think the driving force, and that again should be welcomed by the investor. Again, it should not be seen as a thing of control, but really it's what's best for the company. What type of board structure, what board construction really serves the company best. And that should be aligned. That should be in the best interest of the investor as well. It should not be about control.
Fully agree. And in the end, you're all sitting in the same boat. You want to see the company succeed. That's very important.
But I mean, of course, there are conflicts of interest, right? As soon as you have investors on board and the investors are part of your board, they are sitting in there with two hats. One is the director. I'm a director, member of the board of directors of that board. And with that, I have fiduciary duties towards the company. And then I have another hat, which is I'm investor. I represent fund XYZ. Yeah. And there I have a fiduciary duty to my limited partners and my fellow general partners, right?
And maybe a different timeline.
And they might not, oftentimes they are aligned, right? The success of the company is good in both cases, but not often. And I think these conflicts of interest are a bit brushed over sometimes by investors. They're a bit sugar-coated. And I think, again, what I've seen is that the very, very strong investors address and handle them very transparently.
No. That's the Champions League.
Yes.
I would say.
Yes.
Because you as a founder, you really have to challenge that. If for example, one of your investors, their fund terms are coming up and they need an exit fast, but you say, no way, we need to build something bigger. It's too early.
Yeah.
You have to replace them.
It's a brilliant example, right? And this exact example, it has nothing to do with bad intentions, with bad behavior. It's just factual differences, right? Exactly as I say, I need liquidity, but as a founder, as the founder CEO, I would say, no, we have plenty of room to grow and build much more. I don't want liquidity. I want to build. We can go much further, right? And again, that's an area where it is so much easier for an independent board chairperson to call out that investor saying, hey, excuse me, with all due respect, you're actually now talking as an investor. We're here to take a decision as a company. So your fiduciary duty is here as a director. What's best for the company, not what's best for the fund, right? I can call that out politely, but firmly as a board chairman, as an independent person. As a founder, that is very difficult to call out, right?
I love that. And then maybe you find a solution. You do a secondary, they leave the board, everyone is happy.
Exactly.
But you need to understand the incentives.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yes.
Let's continue about how you actually work together as a board, especially from a CEO's perspective. You heard before, many say, well, it's a necessary evil. It doesn't really add value. How can you change that? How do you actually work with your board to bring the company forward and to actually generate that value?
So it takes two to tango, right? It really is a joint effort. It's not on the entrepreneur, on the CEO to make the board work. It's not on the board chair. It's not on the investor to make the board work. It's joint collaboration, right? It's joint effort. And there's many things that come into play. And I think it's almost like a bit of a pyramid. At the most foundational level, there's like behavior elements that need to be in place. Building trust, right? Having trust in the boardroom is essential. To make sure that you constantly work on what is called psychological safety, right, in the boardroom. That people have the courage, feel comfortable enough to speak up, to ask a question, to possibly disagree. Those things are very, very challenging. Then I think at the strategic level, there's elements like information asymmetry. The CEO will always have more information and her team, right? The CFO and maybe the CTO or the CPO also sits in part of the board meeting. The C team that is at least parts of the boardroom possibly, they will always have much more information, right? So how do you bridge that information asymmetry? How do you provide sufficient context to the board in an effective manner that they can actually contribute, that they can leverage that additional distance, but not sit in the dark, right? If there's too much distance, then they're detached, then they cannot add value either, right? Or conflicts of interest that we just broached upon, right? That's another strategic level, kind of this whole composition that we started talking about, right person, right seat, right time. And then the last element, these tactical elements, right? How do we prepare for the board meeting, the board pack? How do you facilitate the board meeting? What is the aftermath of the board meeting? And again, the last part, I think, are the ones that are most recipe-like, kind of cookbook style that you can really, but interestingly, even those things that are presumably really not rocket science, they're handled very badly still in many boardrooms.
This first part of having this sort of trust and the psychological safety, how do you build that? Because you don't really have that much face time together, right?
Correct.
So that's a big challenge.
It is. It truly is. In a way, you can think of the board as a team as well. Right? And we all know how it takes effort to build trust in a team. But exactly as you say, it's even more difficult because you meet quite irregularly. Second, for most of the people on the board, this is not their primary role. It's a secondary or tertiary role, right? They might be CEO of another company, but they also sit on the board of that business, right? So so all that makes this trust building much more challenging still, which means that there needs to be even more intent to actually do it. So I think adding social components to every board interaction is absolutely crucial, right? It does not always have to be a fancy, elaborate dinner, right? It can also be a joint walk. It can be a joint activity. I had, if I may, an example. A few years ago, I joined a Berlin-based company in medical tech, and right together with their A round. And in the course of their successful A round, their board changed. A few new investors joined the board and a few rolled off. And we had a board dinner the day before the constituent board meeting and the full day strategy meeting, kind of a strategy workshop. And during that dinner, I brought along little cards with icebreaker questions, a tool we use in EO.
I
sometimes,
love them.
Right? And we had dinner deliberately in a private room in a simple Berlin restaurant. And at some point, I pulled out this card. And initially, some of the investor reps at the table kind of seemed a bit put off and annoyed. Kind of, what sort of esoteric stuff is Marc pulling out of his head right now, right? So I explained that we just passed along the cards, switched, flipped them, read the question and elaborate. We played, and after the first round, everybody had warmed up and actually grew to like it. Yeah. And we played a few extra rounds. People really got into it. And what happened is we got to know each other also at the personal level. Because if you dissect trust, there's two components to trust. And Steve Covey in his book really breaks the speed of trust, breaks it up. Yeah. There's the competence-based side. Mm-hmm. I trust you to be competent, right? Yeah. And then there's the correct character-based trust. That's your personality. Yeah. You know, I trust you as a person. Mm-hmm. And those are very different. And one is not sufficient, right?
You need both.
And, you need both. And actually, the next day, the strategy workshop actually almost collapsed into chaos. And really, because what happened is the investors felt that the founders had moved into a different direction from what they had invested in. Mm-hmm. And it was really a critical situation. It was really very, very tense atmosphere in the room. Yeah. And what saved the day is the trust you had built the evening before.
Crazy.
I cannot prove it, but I'm very certain, had we not done that exercise, had we not built that personal trust the evening before, it could have escalated and possibly even escalated badly with real serious repercussions. Yeah. So on the trust side, I think another maybe thing to keep in mind, build trust when there's smooth sailing. Yeah. Right? Build trust when you can, when things go well, because you need it when the proverbial hits the fan, right? But if you only start then, it's too late.
Exactly.
Right? That's when you need it. Yeah. So I look at trust as almost like a bank account, right? I pay into the trust account. Sometimes I need to withdraw from the trust account. Maybe I underperform for a quarter, right? And then if I have built trust, it will go down a lot easier, right? So think of it really as a trust account, paying whenever you can, because you want to have reserves when you need them.
Exactly. I love that. That's a very good picture, an analogy. Yeah. You also mentioned the agenda, the preparation, so more the cookbook recipe to follow.
Yes.
Please also share your insights there, how to make that work and perform well.
Okay, so if we start with the preparation, maybe a few words there. One is I'm a huge proponent of the Jeff Bezos school of meeting preparation, which is not to have a PowerPoint battle, but really write things down in prose. So in all my boards, I insist on the board pack being prose, like a Word document and not a PowerPoint document.
Yeah. No bullet points.
No bullet points. Yeah. Why? Writing down things provides more context, provides more contextual clarity for the writer as well as for the reader, right? I can fake clarity very easily on PowerPoint. Yeah. It's much easier to do if I really write things down. Writing also allows collaboration, right? We can much easier to add comments and things. It can become a living document. And I think another element of the board pack is for the founder CEO or professional CEO to think of it not as a homework I do for the board, but I do it for myself.
I love
this
that.
is my luxury period where I step back maybe from daily hustle and meetings and on and on for 2 hours. I really step back from this daily hustle and think, okay, what does the board need to know? What are the really big things? What I'm really proud of this month or this quarter? And what are the 2 or 3 things I want the board support or challenge or input, right? That reflection, that stepping back, again, that in itself is worth so much. Is worth as much as the board meeting.
For sure.
So I think that is a very element, this luxury of really seeing it not as a task for somebody else, but as a luxury for myself, as a benefit for myself, and using prose and not PowerPoint, I think are very crucial aspects of board prep.
I love the prose part because I'm not sure who said that, but there was like, when they send out a long text, they say, I apologize, I didn't have more time to make it shorter. Exactly. And I feel this really thinking through it and saying very few things very precisely need a lot of preparation, also a certain talent to do so well. And I really always admire that if you are able to say everything you want to say the shortest way possible, but on point.
Yes.
This is beautiful.
Yeah. On top, maybe not all the time, but at times it can be valuable to make pre-board calls, right? It can be the CEO. It can be the CEO together with an independent chairperson. To again, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about lobbying or foul play with an agenda, but really go through the board agenda. That's on the thing. Basically provide this context that people feel close enough that they can really add value, and I think that's a good habit. Yes.
And what are the typical agenda items that you would go through? Because you mentioned what went well, what am I proud of, what are the challenges, but you also have financials and many other things to cover, I assume.
I think at the generic level, there's probably a few fixtures that you need. Again, if you have investors, there's no way you get around financials, right?
Yeah,
so they will be on there.
Yeah.
I think talent needs to be on there. Does it need to be every board meeting? Not necessarily, but periodically. I think don't only think of the board meeting agenda on a bi-monthly or monthly or quarterly basis, depending on your rhythm, but also think of a yearly agenda. For example, again, the boards that I can influence, I insist on having a talent discussion at least once a year.
Nice.
Really have a talent development map. Is all the key succession elements in place? All these things at least once a year. Because if I, as a board member, cannot name every single succession scenario for all my key people, and the key people are not just the people with the C roles, they can also be individual contributors, right? That are super crucial for a certain company, a certain stage. Then we haven't done our job.
Yeah. You have a single point of failure.
Absolutely. And then per board meeting, besides this recurring product can be one, depending on your life cycle, that can be a very recurring one. And then I would say a board meeting cannot have more than one or two heavy deep dive topics. They should have, right? At least one or two additional, besides these regular recurring themes. They should have one or two kind of really fitting to the current time and period where the company stands. But it needs to be limited to one or two. Otherwise, you will be just scratching the surface. And then I think with the agenda, another, I think, relatively easy to do, but powerful thing, impactful thing, is to label every single agenda item, what the status is. Is it for discussion? Is it for information? Is it for decision? That creates so much clarity for the preparation, for the discussion. What type of discussion are we having? Is this a brainstorming? Or do we need to come to a conclusion, to a decision? That's a very different setup. To make that clear, adds a lot of value.
Amazing. And it's the CEO's responsibility to prepare that normally, right?
On the boards where I serve as chairperson, I do that. I mean, formally, it's the chairperson's job.
But practically.
Right? I think very good practice is to do that very collaboratively. Again, the CEO, the founder CEO is driving the business. But again, this questioning from a bit more distance can be valuable already in the agenda setting.
I will re-listen to this episode and take a lot of notes afterwards to execute. I learned so much already.
Fantastic. Happy to hear that.
There's another topic, right?
Yes.
Usually we now came from the angle of, okay, we're getting started. We are assembling our board. But once you start working with your board or you already have a board in place, where do you start to see signs or you have a feeling that develops when things start to break down? What usually goes wrong first? What are some red flags or early alarm signals?
I think a few come to mind. I think one very alarming signal is if the board meeting is sort of 80-20, 80% presentation by the executive team and 20% discussion. I think that's a bad sign, right? That's a bad sign. There's no way to add value, right? That's a one-way street. There's it doesn't work.
It's a keep us all busy exercise.
Yeah, exactly. And then it becomes a necessity, a nuisance, A second one is kind of if you're really at the poles of either no controversy or hardly ever, or only controversy, right? I think any of these two poles are probably a signal for not everything is in good shape either. I really think there should be controversial debate in the board, right? Sure. There should be back and forth. There should be different opinions, making for, Hegel's dialectic, coming to better conclusions, even if it's uncomfortable or tough. And if it's kind of it doesn't have to be a screaming match, but if it's kind of friction all the time, well, that's probably becomes heavy and the drag as well. But controversy, I quite recently I attended a board meeting of a company I serve, and it was a pretty strong controversy in the board meeting, and it was decidedly uncomfortable, right? It was really tense, heavy air, not pleasant at all. But we came out of it stronger. right? We had dinner afterwards, we shook hands, the people who were most pronounced on the polls shook hands, talked it out, and we clearly came to a better result and a better view going forward for the company. So I think these controversial discussions are absolutely necessary, but it needs to be in balance.
In that sense, tough on the subject, but soft on the people.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the last one is I mean, any board that smells a bit like a rubber stamping exercise where, kind of the decisions are clear anyway, that surely is not a healthy. And what I don't mean, it's perfectly all right if you have a family business where the family owns 100%. Yes, of course, as a last resort, they could dissolve the board and elect a new board, right? Yeah. But I think a family that actually has such a board, they will be already starting with a preconception of taking their board director seriously and listen. Now, of course, they will have the ultimate say, but it's preceded by a solid discussion. That's what it's needed. And if that's missing, kind of it's really rubber stamping because it's all clear because one person dictates and dominates, well, then you really may as well just leave it, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes it's not the whole board that is dysfunctional, not performing, but maybe just an individual board member.
Yes.
How do you handle that?
Yeah, that's another tough one, right? And again, having short board terms can be a huge help because, maybe you can just sit it out for a short while and don't need to go through this very uncomfortable separation discussion, which is, again, has a dogma on it, right? Leaving the board can raise question marks and it's visible typically in the registry. Yeah. So people, well, why did this person only serve for 2 years or so? It shouldn't be this way, but at the moment, probably there's still a flavor of that. I think the topic that most comes to mind, a chapter I've covered, I call it keeping the ego in check, right? Egos can create a big hurdle in the boardroom. And I think there's a big transition. For one, most people who serve in a board are people who have achieved something, right? Yeah. With that, typically, again, both sides, kind of chicken and egg, usually comes confidence. Right? It helps to be confident to achieve something. And when you achieve something, you build confidence, right? So typically, people in the boardroom have a certain degree of self-confidence, right? But hopefully it does not veer on the ego, on the arrogance side, right? The boardroom is really a place to keep the ego in check, to really listen to understand and not listen to respond, right? To not seek talking time to be, the hero in the boardroom. There's really no room for that. That's not how a board operates. So the transition for somebody who has served as CEO to a boardroom is not trivial at all, right? It's really a different type of leadership. It's much more servant leadership. It's much more behind the scene. It's much less on stage and really driving it. It's more the supporting and challenging, but somebody else is in the limelight.
And when something like that happens, when there's an ego problem in the board or a board member is not performing, is it usually where the independent board member shines to resolve that conflict or tension? Or is it also then the CEO's job to say, hey, we need to change something?
Again, hopefully it's not the independent person herself or himself that causes the problem. But assuming that, again, it's a prime example where qua independence, it is much easier to address this issue and open the discussion, right? Than it is for a founder CEO to try that. Even if it's, for example, it could be an investor, right? Where I say, okay, the investor, the VC stays on board, but maybe it is replaced. Functionally, it just doesn't work optimally. Again, much easier for the independent person to talk to the VC, to talk to the other GPs at that VC to look for a solution and save face for the person involved and all that than for the founder that possibly wants the VC for the next round.
Exactly. Right? Because you have this good cop, bad cop, right?
Exactly.
I like that.
But I think there's nothing, if it really creates a hurdle, creates some dysfunctions, it needs to be addressed because it drags down the performance. It will kill the joy of other board members.
Of course.
It will hold the board back and it will really impact its performance. So it clearly needs to be addressed.
Yeah, you cannot tolerate that because it will ruin the culture of your board.
Yeah.
We talked about incentives before from an investor's perspective, that there can be different incentives. Another core part is how you actually incentivize your board.
Yes.
Should all the board members also be shareholders in one form or the other?
Again, there's probably a bit of debate there. I think there's value in the board being independent, right? So, but I think co-investing, as an independent board does not take away from that, because the difference to the investor representatives is that I directly invest my own money, right? It's not third-party money. Of course, they're also invested in their own funds.
Sometimes, not always.
Hopefully, or
they should be
in good situations, exactly. So yes, there's a part of own money in there, but it's not direct, right? They invest on behalf of a fund. So I think it's a good sign to align interests. It's a good sign to commit, to not just have a kind of a position as a board member, but also, again, it's sort of walk the walk.
Yeah, skin in the game.
Skin in the game, absolutely. I'm a firm believer in that being a healthy sign. And I usually am willing to, and also think it's really good practice to align interests, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what about like a cash component or something like that? Because sometimes startups cannot really pay that. Should they then pay you in shares as well?
I think it's a gradual shift from very early stage. It will be zero to low cash, right? There's just no cash around. To over time, when you're well funded, there will be more of a balance of cash and equity, and more possibly it goes towards all cash or predominantly cash. A mentor of mine, Niki Schindler from the elevator company, a long time ago, when I discussed something with him, told me, Marc, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys.
Exactly.
So I think it's important to make an effort, even if it's low at the early stage, to pay board members, because you also, again, you expect them to also contribute. You expect them to be there, to be responsive, to invest time. So there should be some counterpart to that. And absolutely, at the start, it can be all equity, right? And there's some rules of thumb. There's ranges, but there's probably a 0.2 to about 1% equity per service year on the board per person. So of course that's a huge range, right? Admittedly, but early stage maybe it's a bit more higher. But if you're already at the 40 million say valuation B round, then it's probably more towards the lower end of that range.
Makes sense. In the end, it's always tied to the valuation of the company, obviously.
Yes.
There's another part I want to talk about, because now we understood a lot about how to assemble the board, how to work together, but things do change once you go from 5 to 20, maybe to a 200 people company. So not only do your tasks as a board change, but also probably the way that you work together, the setup that you need, etc. How does that change, and how do you actually also scale the board as you scale the company? Because I imagine the board could also break down and not keep up with these changes that the company goes through.
Yeah, agreed, right? I think it's a little bit less pronounced than at the operational level, because typically the board members have probably quite a bit of experience already. So ideally they have gone through cycles. They have already seen some scaling in the life experience and hands-on. So it's a little bit different from that point of view, from a perspective of somebody who is operationally in the business, who possibly just faces now a new challenge. It's really a new challenge, right? And it's a challenge too much, right? But at the same time, it's what we discussed, right? The themes can change, the required domain expertise can change, so this can happen. I think at the very core, at the foundational principles of what makes boards work well, I think it's the same at every level of size of the company, right? The dynamics, again, distrust, psychological safety, and all these things, they're equally important. But still, the board dynamics can change. For example, the company might gradually move away from being primarily founder-led, right? Maybe at some point they onboard a professional CFO, right? CFO is oftentimes an important part of board meetings preparation, as well as board meeting itself, right? Oftentimes the CFO attends a good part, at least, of the board meeting. So if that switches from kind of a founder rep who also covers the finance function to a professional CFO who has done it 3 times already and has done 3 C rounds and whatever 3 transactions, that creates a new dynamic in the boardroom and can elevate the level of discussion in the boardroom the same way he or she hopefully elevates the whole setup in the company operationally. And I think that's the most palpable part of that growth, that kind of the same level of professionalization that happens operationally is reflected also in the boardroom.
Makes a lot of sense. I also wonder, with sort of, you said the core parts, the trust, the psychological safety, they remain the same no matter the stage. What role do technology and AI play in all of this? Because I assume in so many different aspects of business, we see that they have a profound impact on how we work. Do they also impact your work in boards?
I probably should hand that off to my friends at Merantix, where I serve as board chairman. Adrian or Rasmus might be more competent to ask. No, I think, I think it's very similar to how I perceive AI to be of value more generically. I think it's the combination of human intelligence and machine intelligence that plays a role. AI can provide a lot of support in board team meetings as well. It can be elements, part of the role of a board secretary. It can easily be seen as a board. Maybe even some views that kind of on top of the personal views or perspectives or idea generation that are brought in by board members, by the board, can be augmented by AI tools. The whole feedback mechanism, preparation for the board meeting, minutes, follow-ups, for example, a running list of tasks.
Amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely. These are all things where clearly AI can leverage, right, and support greatly. Will it replace a board? There's all these projections that are dangerous. I don't think in the near term. I think there's also a legal topic of responsibility that probably will not be kind of changed or overcome that dramatically. But yes, I absolutely see a role for modern technology in the boardroom, again, as a support, not replacing, but supporting and leveraging.
Maybe you'll send your robot or your avatar to the board meeting in the future.
Exactly.
No, but I also see that, for example, AI could make it more transparent that suddenly the board members have access to all the data and can sort of like chat against it to get more information about the things that they really care about.
Yes.
That could be a huge value add, right?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
And if you talk about the future, where do you see sort of this board work headed to? The governance, the board work, where are we headed to? Do you see any trends coming up besides, of course, AI having an influence there?
I think my biggest hope is really that the boards are more and more seen as a possible source of competitive advantage, right? I think if you look at strategy and competitiveness and literature over the last decades, there's hardly anything that has not been explored. Supply chains are optimized, distribution, technology, production. I mean, there's production itself. If you're in the producing industry, a huge evolution and huge progress is made. The financial functions, the personnel, the talent functions, they've all been dissected and improved. They have gone through evolutions and revolutions and improved. I think boards largely have not. Right, boards have not been largely discussed, and if there is all the literature or a good part of the literature is out there, focus is by this label governance much more on the formalistic part.
Exactly.
Right. I think what I've perceived before I started the research I've done is there's really not so much on these more behavioral layers of what makes good board work, and I think if people start to see that as worthwhile, as worthwhile investing, as worthwhile really focusing to get that done, I think a board can add tremendous value. I'm not saying a board will not be able to turn a bad company around, right? If the product is not good, right? No matter, and there are examples of brilliant entrepreneurs that have done it. I don't think Elon Musk's boards, and there's even law cases on it where they were considered not independent enough on the remuneration. He's probably as brilliant and probably doesn't need but then there's always the question, well, what if?
Of course.
Maybe with a strong board, even those outlier, super successful companies could have done even better. So I think that's, for me, is the biggest trend, is to appreciate the possible value board can do it. I think what it takes is very difficult. It's very, very challenging, but it's not impossible. It's absolutely possible and worthwhile.
I really see it after talking to you for almost an hour now. It's fascinating because the board seems to be a leverage that is currently widely underutilized.
Exactly. I mean, literally, if when I talk to, especially in entrepreneurs organization where we are all entrepreneurs, I would say talking to 100 EO members, asking how happy they are with their boards, there will be a small handful that say, crazy. My board is really crushing it. There will be some that say, so it's okay. And the vast majority are unhappy with their boards.
Crazy.
And even more paradoxically, the view is the same from the VCs, right?
No.
Or the PE in larger scale from the PE companies, where they're not happy with their boards, right? They don't see them. And it's such a shame, right? Such a waste, right? So that's really my motivation. It's my passion to hopefully play a small contribution to change that. And even if it's just a few boards that are elevated, that start to create value, then that's good enough.
Absolutely. We could certainly feel that passion of yours. Okay. It's wonderful. So for people who want to dive a bit deeper into that topic, where can I find your work and your book?
Okay, so the book is scheduled to be launched, to be published in May, June this year. So at the moment, it's not yet on Amazon or, in the bookstores, Audible. But May, June, I write regularly about these topics on LinkedIn, on Substack, and I start my podcast, Make Boards Work.
Amazing.
Also in March. So
wonderful.
Follow me, but the book comes out in June.
I can't wait. I will definitely read it. And Marc, to wrap up the episode today, I also want to give you some rapid fire questions where you can answer in one sentence, ideally.
Oh, okay.
You ready?
Okay, I'll try.
What is one habit that makes you a better chair?
There's this line in one of these movies with DiCaprio. Pick up the phone and start dialing. I think there's an F word in there, right? So what's the context? If I say beekeeper, where I served as chairman, every week I got the list of all the people who had a birthday in that week and the bee anniversary, anniversary of their tenure with beekeeper. And I took a habit to call 2-3 people that week, on that day ideally, and congratulate them and thank them, and mainly to listen. So pick up the phone and start dialing. I want to be in touch with the company. Again, we talked about this information asymmetry. That to me is the best means to bridge that information asymmetry, to really hear, to feel the company, know what's going on. And that enables me to actually serve and create value and contribute to value as a board chair.
It's the same for any startup. You need to talk to your customers. In that sense, it's the employees.
Exactly. Yes, totally. Yes.
If you had to choose CEO, founder, or board chair, which role is the toughest? You've seen all of them.
I don't think it's role specific. I don't think there's one answer. They all have their idiosyncratic difficulties and also their beauties, right? Their phenomenal rewards. But I don't think one role is more difficult than the other. Yep. I think what is important to keep in mind that they're really different, right? I talked about this trend, kind of migration from a CEO role to possibly a board role. It's really a very different type of leadership. Yeah. And I think to keep that in mind is very crucial to be effective. If I play two roles or both roles at different companies at the same time, to really switch my modus operandi and really serve in the right way in their capacity. It's very different.
It's like when founders turn investors, they think, oh, I've seen it, I know how to invest, and most of them are not good investors.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Yes.
If you think about the best board meeting that you've ever been in, what comes to mind and why? What made it so good?
Okay. Well, for one, I do think, one good board meeting does not make for a good board, right? It's a system. It's a continuation of productive board meeting. Two really great board meetings come to mind. One was in the EO context at the global board in my first year when we elected the incoming global board members. I really felt bad. There was a lot of felt nepotism, protecting people because they knew them, worked with them before. And actually the outcome was a disaster. It was a very, very bad addition to the board, as it turned out. And then in November 22, it was kind of the first post-COVID meeting that was in person again, November 21 in Dubai. We did the same exercise. And it was a fantastic process. We had very thorough discussions. It was very neutral, no agenda, no protecting anybody, just who is the right candidate, who brings the most value, what combination. And at the end of the day, we did one word closing. And my one word, which accidentally is not one word, as entrepreneurs, we often break the rules, right?
Of course.
I said, that's board work, right? That was board work. We really acted. I felt like really acting at the highest level of performance. I think that board meeting could have been any famous large corporate with huge payments to the board members. We're all volunteers, right? Not paid. That was an excellent board meeting.
Wow, I love that.
And the second one that comes to mind is that was quite a tense board meeting where a very senior, long-time employee was externally accused of something. And the audit team had come back with a recommendation to the board to basically fire that person. And initially, when that motion was brought into the boardroom, it seemed to be a clear-cut case. Yes, okay, recommendation is this way, so we fire him or her. And the board turned it around. And it started with one kind of very low voice, a very quiet voice, and my own doubts. And very similar to that very old movie, and you're probably too young to know, 12 Angry Men, where there's 12 jurors. I think it's even black or white.
Okay.
It's 12 jurors for a crime. And again, that everybody thinks the person is guilty. And then one juror has doubts and slowly but surely turns around and sees the doubts. And the verdict becomes kind of turns very different. So that's how it felt. But it felt very profound. It felt like these doubts were justified. Initially, they were not seen. And slowly but surely, the room turned, and the board really created value by being open to changing their mind and really being more prudent about how we acted.
Wow. This does sound like stuff that movies are made of.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe movie to follow.
That's crazy. Marc, it was a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for your energy and all the knowledge that you shared. I can't wait to read your book when it's
Fantastic.
out. And wish you all the best. And thank you for being here with us today.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.